Good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is the program on the virtual Art Deco tour of Boston. I'm happy to see you all here. We still have a number of people who are signing in, so we'll give them a few minutes to join us. I'm Tony Fusco. I'm the co-producer of Boston Design Week and a longtime Art Deco fan and devotee. I know that many of you are also very, very fond of the Art Deco style, and some of you probably don't have a lot of knowledge about the Art Deco style or about Art Deco architecture in Boston. So this program is intended to bring you some of the highlights of Art Deco architecture in the Boston area. When I published my first book on Art Deco in 1988, shortly thereafter, my partner Robert Four and I founded the Art Deco Society of Boston. And while it exists still in name only, the Art Deco Society was very active for the first 20 years. And a large part of our work was documenting Art Deco architecture in Boston and the surrounding areas so that we could establish a baseline and also identify buildings that we felt really needed attention, needed to be preserved, or that were in threat, under threat of demolition. In 1989, one of our first fights in the Art Deco preservation world was the Coolidge Corner Theater. I don't know if you're familiar with it in Brookline. But it is an amazing theater. The interior is completely in Egyptian Art Deco with sconces and all sorts of figures. And we're really thrilled that that theater was saved ultimately by the Coolidge Corner Theater Foundation and exists today. Art Deco is a name that's derived from the Paris Exposition Internationale des Arts Décoratifs et Industriels Modernes. Art Deco in decorative arts, art décoratif. And that gives you a sense that it was really a style that was all about furniture and jewelry and fashion. And slowly, some of those traces, some of those influences made their way into Art Deco architecture. Often we talk about early Art Deco being sort of a French style of Art Deco and a later Art Deco being more streamlined. Think of a streamlined teardrop shaped camper, things like that. In the United States, the style morphed completely into that streamlined style, which is often called modern. Art Deco architecture is not really a style of architecture, but not a specific style of architecture, but rather it's a distinctive style of modern ornamentation that tried to forego historical influences. The ornamentation is usually reflected to alert your eye that there's been a change in the building's contour. It's a stepped vertical decoration or piers and bays that emphasize height or horizontal bands that emphasize a rhythmic ascent of step backs. In the United States, we think of Art Deco architecture primarily as skyscrapers, like the Chrysler Building, which I'm sure you're familiar with, or the Empire State Building. The most representative buildings of the period are symmetrical ziggurats, as they're called, terminating in a stepped tower with facades finished in contrasting materials. Often the ornamentation is concentrated in spandrels between floors, over entranceways and doors, and reflected in grillwork, vestibules, lobbies, and elevators. Some of the typical motifs that you'll see, especially in the earlier buildings, are stylized cable fluting, a fountain motif, cloud patterns, sunbursts, stylized flowers, and zigzags. In fact, the style was once referred to as zigzag modern and streamline modern and jazz modern, a host of other names, really the word Art Deco or the term Art Deco really didn't come into popular usage until the 1960s. I'm not going to be able to show you all of Boston's Art Deco treasures. There are numerous other Art Deco buildings in downtown Back Bay, the surrounding area, in Brighton, elsewhere around the Boston area. But this will give you an overview of Art Deco Boston. There is a Q&A feature, a chat feature here. I invite you to put your questions in the chat. I may be able to get to some of them. I probably won't be able to get to all of them. There are quite a few people with us here tonight, but I'll try to answer your questions. And please note that when you hit the chat, you can send your notes or your questions to everyone or just to me. So I'm going to begin with a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to show you a PowerPoint presentation to walk you through the Art Deco tour of Boston. So let me share my screen. The first building on our Art Deco virtual walking tour is the New England Telephone and Telegraph Company building at 6 Bowdoin Square. It was built in 1930. It's right next to City Hall Plaza, if you've seen it. It was designed by Densmore, Leclerc, and Robbins. It's a massive modern building dominated by vertical piers in a 21-bay principal facade. The whole makes an integrated statement. It's asymmetrical because that final addition was added in 1970, although it's compatible. It's constructed to house the switching machinery of telephones, which used to be huge. And that's why there are no windows, because it was just housing this switching machinery and they didn't want people to see it. It's a little ironic that this building stands on the site of the wood frame house of Thomas Bulfinch, where his grandson was born in 1763. So we have a Bulfinch base to a modern building. This is an archival photo. Unfortunately, it's not a great quality, but you can see there were smaller vernacular buildings next to this building, including a theater. This was part of the Scully Square area, which was demolished in 1962 to make room for Government Center. In fact, almost 1,000 buildings were demolished and 20,000 people were displaced by that. Let me show you some close-ups and some details. Here's looking up through one of those vertical bays. You really get the sense of verticality here. And this wonderful decoration on the architrave above the doors and above the windows, you can see is a stylized fruit and flower decoration, very typical of French Art Deco. Sunburst patterns on the, with cable fluting and sunburst patterns all the way up to the roof line. Here's a close-up of that. And here's what the door looks like. It's a stepped back granite, polished granite surround. Of course, there's the bell for the telephone company, the Bell Telephone Company, and these wonderful side pilasters with great eagles, stylized Art Deco eagles, chevrons pointing up. Everything wants to take your eye up to the top of the building. This is one of the elevator cabs. It's restrained, but it's obviously Deco. Again, the sunburst patterns, the stylized flowers, the banding, it's just an amazing little Art Deco piece. Crossing the street and going behind Center Plaza is the Suffolk County Courthouse. This is typical of a very restrained Art Deco style. There's so much of this in Washington, D.C. that we call it Greco-Deco. It's just so restrained, very governmental. It has 7 bays on the principal side and 11 bays on the north side. It was recladded in the year 2000. We worked with them to find appropriate material for the recladding. And it's nearly 400,000 square feet with 26 courtrooms, and most of the murder cases take place here. This is a side view going up the street. And unfortunately, you can see these window air conditioners don't do a lot for the Art Deco style. They kind of break up the vision of that verticality. The only way you can get pictures of the inside is to do what I did. When you're on a jury, you can sneak around and take pictures, but you have to be very careful. I really got cornered there because you're not supposed to take any pictures inside of a courthouse. Very simple but obvious deco elevators, terrazzo floors, and this door, which is just an amazing door in the middle of nowhere. I have no idea what it was originally for, but it's just a stunning, stunning door. Here's another black granite, polished granite surround with this wonderful fluting across the top in the copper color. Leaving that area and walking down to Washington Street, we come to the Paramount Theater. I hope some of you have had a chance to see a performance of the Paramount Theater. This was built in 1930, 1932. It's 549 Washington Street. The architect is Arthur Bowditch. This was one of the city's first theaters built exclusively for motion pictures. It has landmark status in and out, but it was closed in 1976 after suffering fire and water damage. It originally already had landmark status before that damage happened. It's a 3-bay modern facade, vertical design elements characteristic of the 1930s. The central bay is defined by cable-fluted pilasters rising from the marquee to the roofline, and the side bays feature single elongated windows covered by metal grillwork. It has one of the most elaborate Art Deco interiors in Boston. It seated about 1,500 people and featured polished Oriental walnut and African ebony walls, Art Deco murals, geometric patterns, and more. So much of the building was gutted by fire in 1976, and it sat literally in neglect and disrepair for 3 decades. There were reports of people living in the Paramount. The roof leaked. The water damage was extensive. It was really a shame. And that whole area, you know, was in the 1970s was pretty run down. I think I've got a historic photo here. Yeah, here's the historic photo of that area. This is 1974. What you see as the Savoy movie house is now the Opera House. That is the Opera House. It became, it was the B.F. Keith Memorial Theater. It was part of the vaudeville circuit, and then it became a movie theater, the Savoy. When the Paramount opened in 1932, it was billed as the first intimate deluxe picture house, and the first feature was Shanghai Express with Marlene Dietrich. And the program had a Burns and Allen cartoon, a Minnie the Moocher cartoon, newsreels, and organ music. There were many different attempts to save the Paramount. starting in 1995 with an effort through the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I'm not going to go into all the details of the number of attempts to save this wonderful building and make it viable for the Performing Arts Center that it is. But finally, in 2005, Emerson College purchased the Paramount Theater. And what was once a single theater was renovated and reconfigured by Elkes Manfredi Architects into an 800-seat proscenium theater with a full-scale fly loft and a black box theater upstairs. That's the outside again. This is just a wonderful photograph of the marquee. And here's a shot of the interior, the renovated interior. This photo is by Peter van der Worker, who's an outstanding architectural photographer who's actually doing a program for Design Week next week with one of our guest speakers. So you can see how wonderful the Art Deco interior is, the murals, the ceiling. It's just a wonderful example of Art Deco in cinema, even though they had to twin the theaters, so to speak. So if you do get a chance to go to a performance there, the theater itself is worth the price of admission. When the Opera House was built in 1928, it was the B.F. Keith Memorial Theater, as I mentioned. It was a vaudeville house. And then finally, when Sarah Caldwell took over that theater in 1978, she renamed it the Opera House. She had 12 seasons in that theater, but the company's finances were historically a shambles. I have a friend who was one of her marketing people, and he sold some advertising for her and came up with $200, and she said, "Oh, wonderful, now we can have live doves released during the performance." She was quite not known for her financial acumen. It was historically, it was designated as a historic landmark in 1999. And the theater next to it, the Modern Theater, has been renovated by Suffolk University. So we leave the Paramount, we walk down the street and come upon this vista of the Second National Bank tucked in amongst higher buildings. It's now called the 75 Federal Street Office Building. It was built in 1929, designed by Thomas M. James. It's a 21-story office skyscraper with ziggurat massing. It's one of Boston's finest Art Deco buildings. Note the dramatically stepped back roof line and the gilded hipped penthouse roof. There are bronze relief panels at the street level featuring agriculture, mining, manufacturing, power, finance, and transportation. It's the first real elaborate Art Deco headquarters in Boston and on our tour. Now, as then corporations vied for prestige through the architectural design of their headquarter buildings, thus the Chrysler Building, for example, was a corporate headquarter. Now we're a little bit closer as we approach. And now you can see the decoration, the floral decoration on each roofline. Thomas James specialized in designing bank buildings, but he also designed Boston's Schubert Theater. So it reflects the new setback zoning. In New York, buildings were allowed to be built higher as long as they were stepped back. That zoning changed in New York in 1916. but it didn't change in Boston until 1928. Which is why we had so few of these buildings in Boston. But this new legislation essentially doubled the scale of downtown Boston. Let's take a look at some of these wonderful bas-relief bronzes by Paul Fitzgerald. It's over the doors. And here are the series of bronze reliefs that go around the building. Outstanding designs. Prior to the preservation of this building, these bronzes were barely visible because of all the soot and grime. This typical sort of scene of men working. And this is one of the panels, which is interesting because it actually features the building. It shows the builder, the architect, and they immortalize themselves in one of the bronzes. This one with horses. This is inside the building. This was one of the original directories, and it was a bank building. So I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but right in the middle here is an owl, because wise people saved money, and squirrels, because squirrels pack away their food for the winter. It's designed with acanthus leaves all the way around. There are two of these in the lobby. They're no longer used as a directory. They're just part of the interest in the lobby. Here's a shot of the elevators. The vestibule itself is in red Levanto marble. The walls are finished with imported French brown marble with pilasters of black marble. We lost the vintage chandeliers in the space, but the new chandeliers are very sensitive, and they unite two buildings, 75 and 101. Prior to the preservation, as I said, the lobby had been modified. The ceiling was dropped. The bronzes were completely black, and the owners of 75101 Federal Street at the time, Franklin Federal Partners, commissioned the New York firm of Cohn Peterson Fox Associates as architects for the preservation and the design of the new 101 Federal Street, which was hailed by architecture critics everywhere. Actually, I'm going to back up just a little bit to show you that. So this is the 75 Federal Street, and to your right and higher is 101 Federal Street. And these two buildings are now twinned. And you can see sort of the Wiener Werkstatt pinnacles here on the 101 Federal Street. It is really sensitively done. You have to get permission to walk through the lobby, but you can really sense, here's the continuation of the lobby into 101 Federal Street. Close up of the elevator. And these wonderful decorations at the top of the black marble, just to add color and interest to the lobby. Here's the inside of one of the elevator cabs, and the letterbox, which is wonderful. So we walked down the street to the New England Telephone headquarters. This is the new New England Telephone building. We saw the 1930 New England Telephone building at the start of the program. This is 1947, designed by Cram and Ferguson. Even though it's 1947, our research suggests that the building was actually designed in 1939, before World War II, which is also the case for the John Hancock building in Back Bay, which we'll see, by the same architects. Because of the war, construction was delayed, building materials were unavailable, and but this is obviously a massive modern building that is from that modern period. It's a steel frame skyscraper with a 4-story entryway. And recently it was renovated. Here's a close-up of the, again, restrained decorations where we've moved into a period where we don't have those elaborate French Art Deco influences anymore. We have a more streamlined and restrained Art Deco. This was the front of the building. It's no longer the front of the building. It's been modified by the current owner. And I'll actually show you the difference between the two. This is the new front of the building. This obviously was all changed. I don't necessarily think it's an improvement. But the other thing they did is they cut the windows down to the sidewalk so that they could have retail space entries. You know, in the original building, I don't have a shot of that, but in the original building, these windows were not cut all the way down to the plaza. This is a historical shot of the building. It pretty much stood alone on that area. And here you see another high-rise that we're going to visit, the United Shoe Building. Laying the cornerstone in 1947. This mural by Dean Cornwell once was in the lobby of the building. It's a circular mural that tells the history of the telephone all the way from Abraham Lincoln to the 1940s. Unfortunately, the mural itself was badly removed in 2009. And negotiations with the new landlord to reinstall the murals in the building fell through. At one point, Verizon was considering selling the mural to a private museum in Newport. Along with the Preservation Alliance, Boston Preservation Alliance, we've fought for many years to have the murals saved, restored, and installed somewhere in Boston. Most recently, we were trying to interest the Annenberg Foundation in their restoration. When the murals were removed, they were rolled up along with the debris, chunks of plaster, all sorts of things, so that they've been damaged even more. The last we know, they were rolled up in and saved in a facility called Artex in Somerville. And I had a friend of mine, David Olin, who restores murals, come up from Washington, D.C. to take a look at them. And he's given us an estimate of $2 million to restore the murals. So we don't know what the fate of these murals is going to be. This was one of the more modern ones, in the 1940s. So the telephone operators, switchboard operators. And this is sort of give you a sense of the scale when we were able to take people in for tours of the murals. 160 feet, 12 feet high, 160 feet around the circle and 12 feet high. Of course, we protested, we did everything that we could at the time, and now the murals still are in limbo. This is actually the drawing for the murals, scale drawing for the murals, which came up at auction at Heritage Auctions in Texas last year. You can't really win every fight, that's for sure, especially when powerful forces are stacked against you. This is the Shreve, Crump, and Lowe building in Back Bay. We're jumping a little bit to Back Bay just to talk about this battle. The original building is Beaux-Arts. It was designed in 1904 by William Gibbons Rantoul. The Art Deco facade at street level was designed in 1930 by William Aldrich. It was very ornamented with restrained Art Deco motifs and classical columns and floral designs. The interiors had fluted columns, it had chandeliers, it had all sorts of Art Deco furnishings. We began the fight to try to save Shreve, Crump, and Lowe building in 2006, petitioning the city for landmark status. The store was stripped of its Art Deco interiors, and we gathered letters from around the world to support it, to support saving it. When those letters were presented to Mayor Menino at the time, it was reported back to us by someone who was in the room that he said, well, these people don't vote in Boston. So with that, and with all the Back Bay citizens that we were working with, we picketed, protested, and occupied the streets. But because the building had already been altered and the Art Deco facade was not original to the building, we argued that it should be saved on the merits of Boston's social history and that it occupies an important corner in the streetscape. We went to court twice and we lost twice. It's now been 15 years, and the developer, who actually holds a demolition permit, has still not moved to demolish the building. This is the chandelier from one of the chandeliers from the inside of the building. And this is some of the detail on that building. If you've never looked at it close up, go take a look before it is gone. He keeps threatening to demolish it, and this is what he's planning. Whoops, sorry about that, folks. This is what he's planning to put in its place. Another sort of featureless Darth Vader building. And this was 2019, so we assume he's been slowed down like everyone else with COVID, and we don't know exactly when this is going to happen, but he does hold the demolition permit and has been looking for a tenant. Let's go back downtown where we still have buildings that are intact. This is what it looks like today, by the way. This is the John W. McCormick Federal Building. It was the US Post Office on Post Office Square. 1932, 1934, designed by Cram and Ferguson. It's a massive freestanding modern skyscraper, all granite facade except for the top 5 limestone floors, which are set back. This was the way of the government giving work to New England granite quarries during the Depression. Rarely, I mean, you'll never see, I think you'll never see a building that uses so much granite. Typically, granite is used for the first couple of floors of the building, and then a granite base for the building, and then the limestone or some other material. But this one uses so much granite. The lobby area, although it's run down, is still intact. There are copper window grates for the basement, stylized eagles over the doors, classical and natural forms, palmettes, acanthus leaves, wheat sheaves, and other symbols on the exterior. The caduceus, which is the wand of Mercury, the messenger of the gods. It was determined eligible for listing on the National Register in 1987, but it was not made a landmark until 1998. Here's a close-up where you can see that limestone setback. And here are your fasces, your bundles of sticks, your stylized eagles. This was actually given to me by people that were renovating the building, and they were wondering if these were arrows in a quiver, but it's actually the symbol for United We Stand, because nobody can break a bundle of sticks like this. And here we have the Mercury issues. This is Ralph Adams Cram. He was featured in December 1926 on the cover of Time magazine. He was a distinguished architect. He became one of America's leading exponents of the Gothic revival style. He also designed the Art Deco John Hancock Tower in Back Bay, the New England Telephone Building, which we just saw, and the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. Now we've moved a couple of blocks away from the post office, and we're looking at what was called the Public Service Building when it was built in 1928. It's at 54 Battery March Street. So now it's often referred to as the Battery March Building, and it's a Boston Hilton Boston hotel. Built in 1928, the architect was Harold Field Kellogg. It was the first skyscraper, so to speak, in Boston. It's 14 stories tall, and it's reinforced concrete with brick cladding, 3 5-bay towers, and 2 3-bay setbacks. It was designed just before the 1928 zoning law permitted buildings to be higher, provided that they were set back. So this was just before that change that allowed 75 Federal Street, for example. It was declared a landmark by the Boston Landmarks Commission in 1995. It's an odd building in some ways. It's been called Mayan Revival because it makes use of Mayan geometric patterns. but the false balconies actually have a kind of Moorish flavor. And at the summit of our Heads of New England Pilgrims, way up here at the top, covered in gold leaf. Over the doorway, there's an arch which shows a colonial soldier uncovering a cannon. Indeed, American revolutionaries buried cannons to hide them from the British, and one of them was uncovered during the construction of the building in 1928. So the most stunning feature of this building is that it used 30 different colors of brick, from dark brick at the bottom all the way up to a very light brick at the top. So it looks like the building is always being bathed in sunlight, which in fact, you might think, oh, it's the photograph, but it's actually the color of the brick as you go from the base to the top. This is an odd angle on the building, but it gives you a much better sense of the style of the building. So we leave Battery March Street and go to High Street. This is the United Shoe Machinery Corporation building. This is the main entranceway. 1928. Parker Thomas Rice and Henry Bailey Alden were the architects. It's a 24-story plus 2.5-story penthouse, landmark Art Deco skyscraper with ziggurat massing. It's Boston's absolute finest Art Deco skyscraper. Limestone ground floor, black granite base, original bronze storefronts. The transom grillwork is stylized nudes and imagery relating to the shoe industry. And we'll show you a little bit of that. Oh, this is the best sort of shot you can get now with the tall buildings that are surrounding it. But you can see the step backs, and you can also see this sort of trapezoidal penthouse, which is covered in a gold terracotta tile, which you can see from quite a distance if you get the right angle on the building. It's got the most intact interior and exterior Art Deco features in Boston, and it was the first to take full advantage of that zoning law change in 1928. It's a trapezium building plan. So from a distance, it almost looks flat, and it really distinguishes the building against the skyline. Here's a closer view of that transom grillwork and the bronze. These women are leaning on a shoe lasting machine. It's a machine designed to sew the soles on shoes. Before the United Shoe Machinery Corporation really built its reputation and its fortune on this machine. And before that, all shoes were sewn by hand, which of course was arduous work. Unfortunately, this is an interesting chapter in the history of corporate greed, because the shoe lasting machine was actually invented by an immigrant, a Caribbean immigrant. The company bought the machine patent for a song and built an empire, and the original inventor died in relative poverty. In 1929, they controlled 98% of the shoe machinery business in the United States and had subsidiary companies all over the world. They sold the building in 1984 and moved to Connecticut. And it was, since then, it was operated as a general office building with a succession of owners. The interiors are truly amazing. There's a close-up of that. These wonderful stylized fountain motifs, that's something you see a lot in Art Deco, these frozen fountains, as they're called, and the stylized fruit and flowers. So this really takes advantage of a lot of the French motifs of Art Deco. Here you have a close-up of those wonderful workers. And now we're actually inside the building. This is one of the surrounds on a retail space within the building. Again, this cornucopia of stylized fruit and flowers, this wonderful frozen fountain motif that keeps recurring. And here's a wonderful exterior shot, again, that's stylized. Here's the poor cow whose leather was used for the shoes. I don't know whatever inspired them to use the cow, but there it is. Sort of like the owl in the 75 Federal building, which is a bank. Here's a shoe lasting machinery building that uses a cow. Another little vestibule shot of a ceiling lighting fixture. Colors off on this shot, but you get a sense of the design. Here's looking from the inside out. So there's this decoration, this wonderful decoration on both sides of the building, interior and exterior. Folks, I see a couple of people have tried to raise their hands. I'm actually proceeding through the PowerPoint, and then we'll get to a Q&A type of period. Another shot of one of the chandeliers. This is a very difficult building to get into, particularly since 9/11. You really have to have permission in advance to get into the lobby, but you can peek in through the windows, through the doors. Now we've moved to the back bay, back to the back bay. This is the John Hancock building at 200 Berkeley Street, also built in 1947 by Cram and Ferguson. There are so many similarities between the post office building and this building, just in terms of the floor plan, the massing, the design of the lobbies, that sort of thing. They were obviously designed by the same architects. We think both were designed in 1939 and put on hold during the war. The John Hancock building has 26 stories. The cornerstone weighs approximately 5 tons. There's a bit of trivia just in case anybody ever asks you. The floor is cladded, first floor is cladded in polished granite, quarried in Maine. The upper floors are sandstone quarried in Ohio. Well, I forgot to mention, when they renovated the United Shoe Machinery building, about 10% of the bricks needed to be replaced, and they couldn't find the right color of brick. So they actually had to reopen the quarry in Ohio that had been closed for quite a long time to get the right color of brick for that restoration. The elevator cabs are very similar in both buildings, and the elevator lanterns were identical in both buildings. It's another shot. This is actually shot, I believe, from the top of a parking garage to get this angle. And there's the weather beacon. I hope you all know the story of the weather beacon in Boston and that you've seen it. This lights up when it's steady blue, it means clear view. So the poem goes, so you can remember it, goes steady blue, clear view, flashing blue, clouds due, steady red, rain ahead, flashing red, snow instead. And during the summer, if it's flashing red, it means the Red Sox game has been canceled. I think my thing might be frozen a little bit here. Because it can be seen from South Boston, so people didn't have to drive into town if the Red Sox game was canceled. This is also in Back Bay. It's called the New England Power Building, 441 Stewart Street, designed in 1930. Blackall, Clapp, Whittemore, and Clark. They also designed a number of theaters in Boston, the Wilbur, the Colonial, and the Bach Center, the Music Hall, which is now the Bach Center. It's right behind the Copley Plaza Hotel. It's flat-roofed, 11-story building. It was originally planned to be over 20 stories high, and it was supposed to be part of a $30 million project that was planned for Copley Square. It was going to bring Boston the second largest office complex in America. But they hit the Depression. So they only built 11 stories and then they topped it off and they didn't build any of the setbacks. One of the most distinctive features of the building are these spandrels with the frozen flower motif. Aluminum spandrels. Spandrel is the element between the floors. These were all removed, restored, or recreated, restored, and replaced when the building was renovated. So does anybody know what this building is? This is a building that never got built. And I think if you have a sense of what it is, put it in chat. Let's see if anybody, I'm looking at chat right now. Has anybody got a sense of where this building might have been, what it might have been? People are saying, oh, it's the Schrafft's building. Oh, it's North Station. It's the train station. It's similar to Sears Roebuck. Oh yeah, that Sears building in the Fenway. Fellow Bridge, Science Museum. Uh-oh, we're getting warm here. Yeah, it was actually proposed for the end of Charles Street. It was supposed to be, you see that bridge, so to speak, that runs through it, that train that runs through it. It was supposed to run through the building. And it was, unfortunately, it was never built. I think it would have been a very cool building. You can see this, the circle there where the traffic would go around it, but it was never built. It's one of the Art Deco buildings that we never got to see completed. But if you walk around Back Bay, you see little bits of Art Deco here and there. This is actually the Junior League building, Junior League of Boston building. It's condominiums now. It's 6 Arlington Street. Polished black granite entrance. This is the roof line, which is definitely a Mayan sort of setback pyramid look. It's built in 1929 by Strickland, Blodgett, and Law. And what do you think is the most famous Art Deco building in Boston? Again, you can throw it in chat if you have an idea. I'm not going to move to the next slide until somebody ventures a guess. The most famous Art Deco structure in Boston. No, nobody? Nobody? Coolidge Corner, Library, the Hancock. Actually, the most famous Art Deco structure in Boston is the Hatch Shell. The Hatch Shell was dedicated in 1940. It replaced a 1934 metal shell after it was damaged by the hurricane of 1938. It's a memorial to real estate developer Edward Hatch. It cost $270,000, which was a lot at the time. And the Pops concerts, of course, made it Boston's best known Art Deco structure. It's made of reinforced concrete with polished granite and rustic terrazzo. The interior is lined with teak wood because it has both acoustic and aesthetic values. There are 710 bronze letters inset on the shell, which spell out the names of 86 composers from the 16th to the 20th centuries. The $4.4 million renovation project was completed in 1991, accomplished by Feingold Alexander Associates. And the architect was Richard Shaw. He worked from a German model for a structural shell, but modified it to accommodate a larger orchestra. So that ends our tour. And it's supposed to go back to our regular Zoom, but I think my regular Zoom is frozen. So I can't see you folks. Let's see if it comes back. No, it's not coming back. I'll try to take some questions, although if you can hear my voice but not see me, that's okay. But I'll try to take some questions if you have questions. Ah, there we go. People were raising their hands earlier. Yeah, the Sears building in the Fenway is another very good example of the Art Deco style. And it is a landmark. It is called the Landmark. So what happened, someone says, what happened to the Alexander Graham Bell workshop? We don't know. When it was finally removed from that building, we don't actually know what happened to it. We tried to get Verizon to reinstall it someplace else, but didn't have any luck with that. Somebody's telling me that the mailbox, which I guess we saw, is actually a Cutler mail chute, which was invented and produced in Rochester. So there's someone from Rochester with us, making sure that they claim their piece of the Art Deco puzzle. Twinned meaning connected. Yes, 75 and 101 Federal Street are connected. So you go from one lobby to the other. The buildings themselves are still freestanding, but the lobbies are connected. The reliefs are done. I'll type his name. It's Paul Fjeld. Just put it in chat. There are several questions people had typed. Who was the architect for the telephone building? The early telephone building, the first telephone building, the 1947 building was Cram and Ferguson, the same people that did the John Hancock Tower. The New England telephone building 1930 was Densmore, Leclerc, and Robbins. I think I failed to mention that. Sorry, I couldn't answer some of these questions while I was talking. I've been operating this myself, so I haven't been looking at the Q&As. Someone's grandmother worked as a telephone operator for Bell. Yeah, we had someone who had contacted us who was actually one of the models in that mural in New England telephone building. So she was pretty upset when it was actually, I want to say destroyed, because I'm not sure that we'll ever be able to restore it or find a new home for it. So someone is saying, do you think a real excursion could be organized in the future? Yes, when we did walking tours, we tended to do them on Saturdays, because the lobbies of the buildings were still open, so you could get into the lobbies with permission, because you had to apply to get permission in advance so that you could bring a group into the lobbies. And we did them on Saturdays, and we would never be able to accommodate the 110 people who are with us tonight. Those groups were limited to about 20 people. What is the reason for step backing? So that was so that they could comply with this new zoning law. The zoning law said you could build a building higher as long as it was stepped back. And actually the reason, or one of the reasons, is because at the time they were concerned with getting air and light to the street. So when you find yourself in one of these canyons in the city where the buildings are straight up and all the way straight up, think of that, because if they were stepped back, more light, more air would get to the street. So that was part of the reason that they developed this zoning where a building could be built to a certain height, and then it had to be stepped back, and then to another height, and it had to be stepped back. Well, I'm really glad we had the chance to do this. It's been fun. It actually gave me a chance to catch up with some of these buildings and make sure they were still there, and what condition that they were still in, which is always a challenge. And I hope you all have enjoyed it, and stay tuned. If we do those walking tours. Thanks, everyone. Good night. Thank you all. I'm getting a bunch of thank yous in the chat there.